I try to put in lots of fire shots and stuff to keep you from going to sleep. But I do want to mention to you that I do live in the Siskiyous. I spend a lot of time in places like the Red Buttes. I have not explored as much as I would like the monument. I've been doing a fair amount of hiking there, but it's a little bit more of a drive than some of the places I visit in the Siskiyous. I have found it to be a botanical Disneyland, and I'm really glad. I understand a lot of you folks in here had a role in getting that out of the timber base and set aside. And I'm hoping you'll also have a role in dealing with some of the fire issues that are bound to come up. I did work in fire for many years, and I did part of my graduate work in fire ecology and fire behavior. And I'm really hoping that the monument can be managed in such a way that the resources that are there can be maintained in an environment of increasing severity and intensity of fires. It really is 2 degrees warmer, and I think we've all got to deal with the spectacular effect that's had on fire behavior in the last 20 years or so. They really are getting bigger, and they really are getting more intense. And my colleagues and I used to talk about that when I was about 20 years into the fire management thing, and we'd say, these things are getting harder to put out. And then one of the guys would say, no, you're just getting old. And I could never really figure it out, and now we have the data. No, they are getting harder to put out. It's 2 degrees warmer. Why nobody thought that would have a spectacular effect on fire behavior is anybody's guess. But anyway, so just with that I would like to start the presentation about fire in the monument. A lot of you probably know more about the specifics of the monument, again, because you've been working on it. And I'd love some feedback on this presentation if you hang around for a minute afterwards and let me know if I got some stuff wrong. I'd appreciate it. So, and let's see, the mic is miking?
Mic is miking.
Okay, all right. And yeah, it looks good. Okay. Yeah, just an overview. The monument is at a crossroads of several great big ecosystems, including the mighty Cascade Range that goes all the way from southern British Columbia to Mount Lassen down east of Reading. And we're at the south end of that, near the south end of that. And several other ecosystems there. And that's one of the reasons why there's a lot of unique aspects to the monument. And before designation, I think the BLM already had been persuaded to recognize that it is a special place. Before designation, there was already a recreation area, Hyatt Lake, a botanical area, 2 research natural areas, Scotch Creek and a wilderness study area, Soda Mountain, a Tier 1 watershed, that's the blue hatching, and the Pacific Crest Trail. So it was, I think, really obvious for a long time that this was a very special place. And so monument designation was kind of the logical outcome with a lot of hard work on the part of the public. And I understand it was fairly controversial. I was involved in other controversial things, so I didn't really follow it very closely. But they did get a plan out and a record of decision, and I've read quite a bit of it, and I must say it's quite good with respect to fire. It doesn't really give a lot of direction as to how they're going to manage it, but they certainly do understand a lot about how fire works in the monument, or in those, especially in the mixed conifer ecosystem. So it was designated in 2000. I realize this is review for a lot of you, but it'll just go for a slide or two. So initially it was 52,000 acres, and there was also a lot of private in there, a lot of checkerboard. How's that showing up? Can you read it in the back?
Good enough.
Okay, good enough, okay. And there are 32,000 acres of private interspersed, and that checkerboard is a pain in the butt and always has been. A little vegetation overview, and that's Green's Mariposa lily right there. A really magnificent critter. I hope to see that one in bloom before I die. We'll see. Green's Mariposa lily. And here's the plant associations that are contained within the monument. They call it ecoregion now. Okay. This one is the Southern Cascades. Basically, if you think about the Green Springs Loop Trail or Grizzly Peak, that kind of country. Doug fir, ponderosa pine, very common. There is white fir, so it is a fairly moist environment. And it is the place where they think they're going to find the most northern spotted owl nesting, roosting, and forage. And yeah, if I slip into that acronym stuff, just slap me. I worked 32 years for the Forest Service, so it's like I made parole, but I still talk like a convict, you know? It's my apologies. Yeah, acronyms. Anyway, and then the South Cascade Slope, which I would say, think Jenny Creek, that more piney, a little further east, still very high site though. You got really big trees and wonderful landscape. But that is the Southern Cascade Slope, they're calling that. And then the Siskiyou Foothills. And this is the part nearest Medford, the low elevation, oakish lowlands near Ashland, that kind of country, the driest part of the monument, I believe, and certainly the westernmost. Almost no white fir. I happen to have property at 2,000 feet elevation over in the Siskiyous, and I have 2 white firs on the whole 20 acres, 2 of them, and they both look thirsty. So at 2,000 feet, you're not going to find much white fir, or I wouldn't think so. You occasionally find madrone in this part, but mostly oak. Again, that's the big thing. And note that this photograph has a ring of white oaks. I don't think I have a pointer, but you can see there's a ring of white oaks. Some folks think that's a cache of acorns. No. That's evidence of fire. White oak resprouts vigorously, grows new stems. They slowly thin themselves out. And if you poke around in there with your walking stick or whatever in the middle of that fairy ring, you will find bits of charred wood. I almost guarantee it, from the original fire-killed stem. So the fairy ring is a dead giveaway that there's high severity fire. Severe enough to kill an old oak tree and have it sprout and so on. And Siskiyou Foothills and the Klamath River Ridges. This is a dry continental climate down toward the Klamath River. Places like the Scotch Creek RNA. I think some of you probably know Nancy Ames. I think some of her property fits into this. That kind of country, fairly dry. And there is juniper and patches of chaparral, etc. Okay, so I should mention that based on the calculations, they think that most of this, the monument, especially the lower elevations, have missed at least 5 fires that would have, without suppression, would have burned through most of the monument and would have wrought changes that we will describe as this thing goes on. But that's a very important concept, that they have missed fire cycles, because we put the fires out. We made that decision as a country, 1911, the Weeks Act. We said we're going to fight fire. We're going to put them out. And then we came up with Smokey the Bear and so forth. So that's just an important concept. And because of it, ponderosa pine, most oak, both white and black, have decreased. Many stands that were once open and had large individuals now have many, many small individuals. And that's a problem really throughout the Northwest, at least the drier parts. So, and it tends to increase the likelihood that you're going to have crown fires and that you're going to have high severity fire. So now I'm just going to go through a quick overview of the major tree species in the monument in relation to their fire adaptations. Ponderosa pine, insanely fire resistant, even when quite young. When I worked on Bear Springs on the backside of Mount Hood, we were burning, underburning in 9 and 10-year-old ponderosa pine plantations. The trees were that young, but they had already, you know how they're quite stocky, the young ponderosa, and they had already developed bark that was thick enough to resist a little 1-foot flame length. And we had 1%, 2% mortality. And we burned these entire 50-acre plantations of pine, and they would survive. They're just an incredibly fire-adapted species, and of course that's why they're here. It isn't just that they have adapted to it, but then the landscape ponderosa pine becomes part of that landscape, and well, we'll talk about that more. Anyway, so their thick bark is one of their main ways of resisting fire. They have very thick bark, and it's a great insulator. It keeps the cambium from heating up during the passage of a wildfire. They have a self-pruning habit. They have a tendency to lose their lower limbs, so it's a lot harder for the fire to climb the tree. And they actually have a very robust wound response. The whole pine group has a tendency to very quickly impregnate the wood behind a wound, behind an area that's been heated up enough to kill the cambium. It will impregnate that wood behind it with pitch that tastes terrible to fungi and insects. I think it's lethal to fungi. And also, there's evidence that the normal pitch, which is mostly monoterpene acids, the chemistry of it, as it moves toward a traumatic wound through what they call traumatic rosin canals, it will actually become more sesquiterpene acids that are much more unpalatable to fungi and insects. It will actually get more toxic. So it's really got a very powerful defense, wound response. They also have the leaves, those long needles that ponderosa has, have a very high lethal temperature. It's like 160 Fahrenheit before they die, or some very high, much higher than other conifers. So it's a tough tree, ponderosa pine. And I believe I saw an estimate, there's about 40 million acres in the western US where ponderosa pine dominates. So clearly success is survival, as they say. Yes, here you go. This is from that little refugia, that picture of the Douglas fir. They have very thick bark when mature, especially this phenotype that lives here in southern Oregon. They have a fairly light seed with a good wing, good aerodynamic wing, so you can reliably get Douglas fir regeneration about 400 feet from any live tree that survives the previous fire. So that's why you'll find, you'll hike for miles and just say, Jesus, oh, excuse me, heck, everything's Doug fir. Well, that's why. They're very good at recolonizing high-intensity burns. And, of course, a couple of them will survive. So that's, yeah, an aggressive colonizer of high-severity patches. Sugar pine. What can I say? Sugar pine not only has fairly thick bark, fairly good wound response like the other pines, but as with a lot of white pines, it can grow rapidly in height over many decades, indeed centuries. That's why it's able to poke up through brush fields, very dense brush. It'll just poke up through there. It's tolerant of shade enough so it'll get through. It has a good, excellent self-pruning. It's an extremely geotropic tree. It grows very straight if you give it half a chance. And I should mention that this picture on the right, that's a hat to give you an idea how big that tree is. And this is the one at Tub Springs, Wayside. You go walk about 100 miles due south from the parking area. Don't get run over crossing the highway. And you will come in, you will run into this tree. And I mean, it is a magnificent example of this species, Tub Springs. And, oh, yes, trivia. The tallest pine tree on earth is a sugar pine. And it's right on the divide between the Umpqua and the Rogue up in the Cascades. Yeah, they used to have, the maps used to have a little star, and then somebody tried to vandalize it, so now they kind of hide it. But it's right by the road. North Fork of the Umpqua, South Fork of the, or other way around. Anyway, 276, I think, feet tall. Just, it's incredible. But they're wonderful trees. And white fir. And white fir it tends to be at the higher elevations around here and north slopes and places where there's a little extra moisture. They're not, they don't like the dry very much. Older trees are somewhat fire resistant. They get fairly thick bark, but they're very susceptible to rot. If they get a wound, it's very easy for them to rot and get rotten to the point where they break off in a storm, and that's that. So, and they're a very slow reinvader. After a high severity fire, it takes a long time for white fir to get back in because they have a rather heavy seed and a rather poor wing. So these guys, they all have these reproduction strategies, but some of them don't need to fly very far, and some of them do, and it's just very interesting how they evolve the reproduction strategies. And then, of course, incense cedar, the bark is fire resistant. I underburn on my own property, and I've got incense cedars that are maybe like yay, like 5 inches, 6 inches in diameter, and I can run a 2-foot flame length through them, and they don't weep pitch, or any other sign that they even were hurt by it. They just, yeah, few of the lower limbs die, and that's it. So they have very fire-resistant bark, and they have very rot-resistant heartwood, even though they have this endemic heartwood called pocket dry rot that all of them get when they're old. But the regular old generalist stuff that gets into a fire scar and rots a tree and makes it fall over can't do it. Incense cedar, the same thing that makes it smell good. Those are hydrocarbon compounds that, again, are yucky to fungi and insects. So, rot-resistant heartwood. Whew. And last but not least, they're capable, they have extreme longevity, capable of living for many centuries. There's some evidence that there's trees over 1,000 years old, but again, they get so much of the pocket dry rot. It's just really hard to count rings when a tree has endemic rot. They live for a long time. Okay, we got several slides about oaks because they're very important. They're important for wildlife. They were culturally very important for indigenous people because there was starch that was available to a group of people that ate a lot of protein and really relished some carbos. And also just because their innate interest. Anyway, they have a complex relationship with fire. They're both resistors and evaders. That is, some older trees will survive a fire because they have very thick bark for a hardwood, relatively. And some trees resprout from stumps if they're top killed, and it's a relatively young tree, like less than 400 or so. They'll vigorously resprout and form a ring, again, of new trees. And some acorns stored in the duff will sprout and grow. So one way or another, they come back very well from fires. High severity, low severity, doesn't matter to an oak tree, they come back. And the range of them overlaps. I drew there's a little red thing around that's actually the Rogue Basin, and we're on the eastern side of it, the monument. But I guess everybody probably knows this. Pointy lobes, black oak. Round lobes, white oak. It's just a fact. Okay, so let's take a look at white oak real quick. It has the longest north-south distribution among western oaks. Vancouver Island to Southern California. It can withstand both drought and flooding. White oak's amazing that way. Up around Eugene, there's places where there's clay underneath in the subsoil. Nothing else but white oak can occupy some of those stands, some of those sites. Subsurface clay layer that restricts water penetration is typical. Substantial declines throughout its range. Again, it happens to be where people want to do agriculture and build subdivisions. So, bummer for oak, the white oak. Can reach 100 feet in height, but typically is between 40 and 80, and I would say shorter, usually around here. Often occurs in clumps. Again, multiple stems represent one organism. Following fire, they sprout vigorously from the base. God, I've said that about 10 times. Sorry, guys. Can live to be 300 to 400 years old and as much as 500 years. Thick leathery leaves with rounded lobes, begins producing acorns around age 20 and achieves maximum production around age 80. And if they're in the open and they have that kind of broccoli-shaped crown, like they're getting plenty of light, those tend to produce a tremendous amount of mast acorns. I guess it's mast if you're an elk or a deer, and it's acorns if you're a person. So anyway, same diff. Yeah. Okay, another Oregon white oak, and you can see there, maybe you can't, fedora walking stick. This is a huge stem, but it's only about 20 feet tall because it's had everything in the world happen to it. I saw evidence of a lightning strike. It's got just that one limb still alive. It looks like it survived multiple fires. At the base, there's a bunch of scarring. They're able to do this because in their heartwood, there's a structure called tyloses. And that structure blocks water and therefore fungi from moving around in the heartwood. So if the water can't get in, the fungi can't get in. So the heartwood of white oak, also excellent firewood, is a big part of why it's able to survive fire, flood, and other disasters. This fire-scarred, lightning-blasted white oak to live to a ridiculous old age, and it was just this great big stem, but like I say, 20 feet tall, 4 feet in diameter and 20 feet tall. Okay, high fire frequency tends to result in low fire severity. So trees that don't have terribly thick bark, like Oregon white oak, certainly compared to a ponderosa pine, it has not very thick bark. It's able to survive because the fires are so frequent, because they burn off the duff and the litter and all the twiggies and junk that's in the forest floor to the point where the next time it's burned, there isn't much there to heat up the cambium and kill the tree. This particular white oak here, which is a nice 20 inches in diameter, it's a fairly big tree. It's on my property, so it's not in the monument, but the point is, this is the third or fourth, can you see the black? It's just been underburned. Can you see that? That's the third or fourth time I've underburned in that stand. And there is no evidence of scarring, pitch weeping, any of the signs that it might be getting hot enough so the tree even knows the fire's there, because there's so little fuel. It's how this stuff works. Note the lack of surface and ladder fuels. Okay. Black oak. It has darker bark than white oak, and black, white. They're both shades of gray, if you ask me. But anyway, it's darker and has pointed lobes. Fire can stimulate the germination of acorns, and low to moderate intensity fire can improve regeneration of this species. California black oak is somewhat tolerant of shade, certainly more than white oak, for the majority of its life. It may grow on somewhat better sites than white oak. Yes, deeper soils you will find black oak. And in the monument, we found some on the tunnel trail that had to be 4 feet in diameter. It would have made good fisher habitat. Fishers like big oaks, or they select big oaks. But they do, they get very big if there's deep soil and enough moisture. So that's something, a fun thing to look for in the monument. There's humongous black oaks here and there. And often mixed with white oak in oak woodlands. Yes. Okay. And the occurrence of black oak, more than 200 years old and as much as 500 years old in a region with historically frequent fire, suggests that California black oak stems can survive multiple fires. And the reason I picked this slide, this very large black oak stem right next to a dead black oak, this is in the Ishi Wilderness, east of Redding. Believe it or not, there's a plateau there called the Beaver Creek Pinery, and you have to climb up rimrock to get to this place. And it's all chaparral for miles and oak for miles around it. So nobody ever came and logged it. It would have been really hard to get a road in there. And this plateau keeps burning. It's burned 4 or 5 times since 1900 when they found out about this place. And it's mostly ponderosa pine because ponderosa pine likes fire, or at least low severity fire. But one of the only hardwood that's really there and thriving is California black oak. And it's very similar to the monument, to the conditions in the monument. So that's kind of gives us an idea of what would happen if fire was restored, low severity fire on a fairly regular basis in a place like the monument. The black oak would do just fine, is what I'm saying. That's a big tree. So yes, plateau, no effective suppression due to topography and remoteness. Very high frequency of low severity fires has maintained the black oak. And this is saying basically the same thing, only this time we got some nice ones changing color here, and of course some pile burning, and the fire return interval of less than 10 years are required to stop successional replacement of California black oak by conifers. In other words, according to the FEIS, the Fire Effects Information System, which is an online thing, you could spend hours on it. It's tell you all about fire ecology of different species. Anyway, what they're saying is, if you don't keep burning, you will lose the black oak to the Doug fir and the pine. It'll get overtopped, shaded out, etc. So this is one of the interesting things we find about oaks. And that is, of course, a tremendous land use challenge because we want to maintain oaks. They have a lot of value for wildlife and so forth, and it's very difficult to do controlled burning nowadays or anytime. Okay, so now, yes, they overlap. These two species, which are the main species in the monument, have a lot of overlap, and a lot of it is right here in Oregon, southern Oregon. And it's already 20 of, okay, quickly, here's the Rogue Basin, about 4 million acres, a little over 4 million acres. It's a little hard to see, but the blue is oak woodland. So it's all of the 4 million acres in the Rogue Basin, almost 1 million acres are considered oak woodland of one kind, or oak woodland, oak savanna, oak this, oak that. So it's a very widespread species in this dry Mediterranean-like climate. So, and about 400,000 acres of that is federal, of that oak woodland. And I won't even bother. This is just saying almost all of the prairie and savanna, that's the very open oak stands that aren't even forest or woodland. They're like less than 30% crown closure. So they're more grass than oak type places. Those have almost all been encroached by subdivisions, agriculture, etc. So that's what that fairly complicated slide is saying. Okay, and a few brief words about the physiology of oaks. Obviously, they grow on hot, dry sites. They have both surface roots so that the occasional rain shower, they can grab some of that, and they have very deep roots. Mature trees have a deep taproot and are able to reach water quite far down. They have higher photosynthetic rates in drought conditions than other species that they grow with. They're able to keep making food when it's hot and dry, in other words. And they have large diameter vessels, the ring porous xylem. You can see with the naked eye, you cut a cross section of oak, it's got these little pores you can see. And that is part of their strategy. When there's plenty of water, they've got these big these big vessels. They can push a bunch of water up and to make growth. And then when it gets dry, they have a bunch of little pores that can continue to move water. So they got just a very clever system. They have higher leaf conductance and fewer days of stomatal closure during drought. In other words, they don't have to close up shop in dry weather. They'll continue to do gas exchange. Their stomata are open. They're letting loose oxygen and taking in carbon dioxide. All right, global warming. So they're doing good for us, and they're able to do it on hot, sunny days when a lot of trees are shut down. And they can dip into groundwater and have mycorrhizal fungi, hyphae, that extend into the granite matrix. They can actually get in there and pull water out of cracks in granite. So they're a pretty amazing tree. They really, well, in combination with these fungi that they partner with. Just briefly, if you're a lumper, this won't make much difference to you. If you're a splitter, you'll be overjoyed. There's 10,000 ways to split this stuff. And the way that I chose to show you tonight is oak savanna. That's usually, I think, 5% or something like that, canopy closure of oak. It's very open. And then oak chaparral is where it's mixed with manzanita, Ceanothus cuneatus, several Ceanothus species, etc. Oak chaparral, and then oak woodland, which is just bigger oaks and some fir and pine here and there. There's a ton of that over in the Applegate. And then what they call mixed oak and conifer. And both of those are 30 to 60% canopy closure, canopy cover, whatever you're calling it. So that's just a lot of ways for oak to live with the other species, and it forms a gradient of moisture too. The oak savanna that I just showed you back one slide ago, you're down like 11, 12 inches of rain a year. You know, the agate desert there east of Medford, really dry conditions. They can handle that. All the way up to, come on, there we go. The mixed oak conifer there that you see, that's like 15, 20 inches of rain a year, relatively abundant precip. So they can occupy a range. And there you go. We're done with our veg overview, and now we're going to start on the humans. And what do we, okay, all right. The people who first came here, and by the way, I talked to a couple tribal members. Who did you put me in contact with? Well, anyway, I talked to a couple tribal members, and we talked over what would be respectful to say and what might be a little less. And I think we're good. But excuse me, with that caveat, the people who settled here, we think at least 30,000 years ago, but it's possible it could be way more. We really don't know when the first people got here. But they definitely faced a problem, and I think it's brilliantly illustrated. I used this slide twice. This is real-time radar of downstrikes. This is, they can now do side-looking radar that'll tell you when a lightning bolt hits the ground. And these are strikes over just 2 hours, 120 minutes. And you can see thousands of them there north of Happy Camp, a whole bunch along the Cascades, and then there's some over in here in eastern Oregon. Dry lightning is a fact of life, and whoever came to live here saw that lightning, saw big nasty crown fires ripping around, burning up their fishing camps or whatever, they had to deal with fire. And they had a choice. Oh, come on. Thank you. They could just react to fires started by lightning, you know, these fairly high severity fires, get out of the way, jump in the river, whatever. Or they could work with fire. They could make friends with it, basically. They could figure out a way to have it work for them. And they did. Over God knows how many generations, they learned the fire secrets. They really did. You got to hand it to people. They're just homegrown scientists. People who just naturally figure stuff out. Every generation has a few engineer types and a few people who are real imaginative, and next thing you know, they've figured out how to use fire as a tool. And because they were able to figure this out, they were able to take advantage of the fact that oaks have this tremendous ability to produce edible food, carbohydrates, acorns. Once you leach out the tannic acid, there apparently you can make bread and all kinds of foods out of it. And like most indigenous pre-industrial societies, they had good protein, elk, deer, salmon, oh boy, you know. But carbos were harder to come by, carbohydrates. So this was a very important food. And being able to culture oaks, you got to be able to do fire. There's just dozens of reasons why, including just the fact that trying to find acorns in a bunch of snowberry under an oak tree is take forever. You burn it off, now you can see all the acorns. So there's just a lot of things, simple and complex, that they did. They intensively managed fire, and they had a spiritual connection to both fire and oak trees, as near as I can tell. They used the wood, they used food source. Apparently a single oak tree, if it's properly cultured, can produce hundreds of pounds of acorns in a year. So it was a big deal. And so they had a ceremony, of course. Humans, they got to make a religion out of everything. Sorry, that was a little editorial there, sorry. But they did. They had a first acorn ceremony, cultural identity, legends and festivals. They did, again, very clever pest control, burning at the right time so the worms couldn't get into the acorns, burning at the right time so it was really easy to rake them up. And again, learning how to leach the tannic acid took some real homegrown chemistry. You got to figure out that ash is very basic, and that then the tannic acid is an acid, and you know, take it from there. So, and they also knew that they could, again, using fire and the grass under the oaks and the oaks themselves, they could create a lot of wildlife habitat, a lot of edible critters. So, and of course, greatly reduced tree and shrub competition, and I might add, burning around villages and around travelways was a very important feature of being able to deal with wildfires when they did come. You could get out of their way, and they wouldn't burn very hot when they got to your area that you had used fire to manage. So, and moving on from that cultural stuff, but I must say, and I really believe this, I worked in fire for a long time, and my very first job was the Intertribal Council of California fire crew. And they hired all the local, mostly Paiute folks around the Susanville area. And then they hired some folks from the forestry school there in Susanville. They used to have a 2-year degree in forestry. So my very first year in fire, I worked with a bunch of people who didn't believe in Smokey the Bear. And it would say stuff. They'd say, let this one burn. These white people, that kind of stuff. And, there was a lot of back and forth. But from early on, very lucky in that way. In 1972, I was exposed to people who thought Smokey the Bear was bullshit. So, again, sorry. So it's just very interesting. It really is. And I really believe that what indigenous people knew, modern fire practitioners use. when I set up a backfire, I was thinking about some of the stuff that these people had learned thousands of years ago. So it's very interesting. We stand on the shoulders of giants. Getting corny here. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about fire behavior, because if we want to understand what's going on in the monument, it's important to understand how some of this stuff works. First of all, you can really bet on 3 factors. Fire will respond, is governed by 3 factors in the forest: fuels, weather, and topography. And the only one of those we can really do anything about. Even today, with all of our technology and our remote automated weather stations and all that stuff, it's fuels. That's the part we can control. We can't control the fact that the mountains around here are really steep. We can't control, well, you get the point. Fuels are divided into live and dead fuels. Green forest trees will burn, but not as easily as dead material. Leaves and twigs and things like that. The dead fuels really do drive a lot of fire behavior. And dead fuels are further divided into time lag classes based on how fast they dry. This is really an important concept. Fuel moisture. Water won't burn. You have to boil all the water out of a chunk of firewood before it'll burn and come and give you heat in your house or out in your campfire or whatever. So you got to get rid of that water. And if the water's there, things won't burn. So what we do is, okay, not only will you have that problem, until the thing dries out, it won't burn. But you also have the issue that a little pine needle, when it burns, it's richly supplied with oxygen. There's plenty of air around it because it's such a small thing. There's so much surface area compared to the amount of volume in the pine needle that it just can, woof. A big chunk of wood, totally the opposite. Much harder to burn. It's not richly supplied with oxygen. So what we do is we say 0 to 1/4 inch, like a pine needle or a blade of dead grass, that's a 1-hour fuel. Because if you soak it in a bucket of water and you take it out and put it in a sunny, windy spot, in an hour, it will have reached 2/3 of the way to equilibrium moisture content with that dry, sunny spot. That's what we're talking about. So we're saying it's mostly dried out 1 hour after it's exposed to a dry environment. So that's a 1-hour fuel. It's very important because those are what really drive fires, 1, 10, and sometimes 100-hour fuels. So the next one's 10-hour fuels, 1/4 to 1 inch in diameter, as big as your pinky. That stuff takes 100 hours. What is that, 3 days? Something like that, about 3 days. Again, from soaking wet to 2/3 of the way to equilibrium with, around here we get, 10% humidity some days, It can dry out very quickly. And then you have 100-hour, 1 to 3 inches in diameter, 1,000-hour fuels, which is basically big logs and duff. Duff is considered a 1,000-hour fuel. And I'm sorry, I know this is a little dry, pun intended. I love that one. But it really is good to understand this if you're going to understand the ecology of the monument. So I'm almost done with this because, again, I know it's dry. So what we're saying is a cubic foot has 6 square feet of surface area. So it's pretty hard to get that sucker going. Even if that's a really dry chunk of wood, if you took a chainsaw and made it one of those, it would be pretty hard to get it going. Throw it on a campfire, it would put the campfire out. But if you cut it up into a whole bunch of 3-inch, your surface area is 18 feet, easy to burn. Easy to get it going, to ignite it, and to get it to burn because it's richly supplied with oxygen. And if you're in drying conditions, it dries out much quicker. So, surface area to volume, it's a big deal. So, what happens practically is Ponderosa pine litter has a very high surface area to volume ratio. There's a tremendous amount of surface area for just a pound or so of actual pine needle. They are, forgive me, fluffy in nature, right? You lay on a bed of pine needles, it's soft, and it's usually dry because of this. And because it has that very high surface area to volume, it burns a week before I can get fir litter to burn, Douglas fir litter or oak litter. I can get pine litter to burn merrily. And I use that. I say, I'm going to light this on fire, and I don't have to worry because it's going to go 100 feet, and it's going to get to some fir needles, and it's going to go out. Because the fir has a much higher packing ratio, what they call, has lower surface area to volume. And so, for example, a well-stacked hand pile, everybody, you see all those hand piles that people do, that's why, because you can get an almost perfect surface area to volume. You can get that thing to burn hot and relatively smokeless. So humans can use this idea, surface area to volume, for their event. Oh, you know, one more thing. No, we don't have time. Wait a minute. It's 90 minutes, right? Yes. Yeah, okay, all right. So there's a thing called Much's hypothesis. And this is Robert Much. He's a scientist. I met him once when he was really old, really smart guy. And he was just speculating when he came up with this. He said, red pine, which is a close cousin to ponderosa pine, has the same 2 needles in a bundle, or 3, I can't remember, but anyway, and they're in a bundle. And they fall off the tree, hundreds of pounds a year falls off the tree, and that's that. And they make a fairly packed litter layer. Ponderosa, first cousin, the bundle splits. When it dries out, it pulls apart. And it curls a little bit. Over 1 million years or so, it developed this trait. And so when it falls, it makes a much fluffier, sorry, I don't know any other word, a very high surface area to volume litter. And and it also tends to drape shrubs. Because it's open like that, when it falls off, it'll catch on a manzanita or a bush. And you'll see sometimes the shrubs are just completely draped with pine needles. Well, when the fire comes, not only does this stuff burn very well, the litter layer underneath, but there's a good chance it'll burn that shrub, kill it, and it's no longer competing with the pine for water. So Much's hypothesis was ponderosa pine deliberately engineered fluffy litter because it wants to burn. It knows it's going to kill the competition, and it knows it's going to leave it so that its children, its seeds, will dominate the forest. That's Much's hypothesis. Robert Much. I think he's still alive, but he's like 1 million years old now. Anyway. Okay, 7 o'clock. Okay, so a few more on fuels. Just so you know the terminology that all these fuels and fire people use. Surface fuels, that's 90% of the thing we deal with is surface fuels. And 0 to 3 inch surface fuel. We don't care about the big logs and stuff. You go to a project where they're hand piling to get it ready to burn in the fall, and what they're picking up is 0 to 3 inch surface fuels. Most of the time the contractor will pretty much tell them that's what we want you to do. Surface fuels, very important. Then there's ladder fuels. Anything, any branch or twig or anything, moss on the trunk, anything that'll help a fire get up into the crown where it's exposed to sunnier and windier microclimate conditions is a ladder fuel, and it's potentially a problem. And then you got aerial fuels, which is the crowns. You don't want a fire torching or crowning where it's continuously running through the tops of the trees. All you can do when that happens is just get the crew out of the way. You cannot fight a crown fire. So it's pretty important. Surface fuel, ladder fuel, aerial fuels. Ground fire, you don't have to worry about it unless you're up in Alaska doing a peat fire. It's like underground fuels. Once in a while you have a rotten root that'll burn underneath your fire line and embarrass the hell out of you by starting a fire on the other side. But anyway, so that's just, yeah, surface, ladder, aerial. That stuff comes up a lot. Okay. Okay, now for wildfire suppression, the main things that they look for are rate of spread, how fast it's able to move through the forest, and that depends on fuels to a large extent. Resistance to control, how many snags does the crew have to cut before they can safely build a fire line? How many big boulders are in the way of a bulldozer building fire line, that kind of thing. Resistance to control. And then finally, severity, which is the part ecologists are most interested in. Severity is the percent of above ground vegetation that's been killed by the fire. So, and so how fast it spreads, how hard it is to stop it, and how much did it affect the forest. So basically these three metrics. Resistance to control has greatly increased since fire suppression due to ingrowth of understory trees and shrubs, a reduction in that canopy base height we were talking about earlier. There's more limbs and things that the tree can climb, and tree invasion of meadows and other openings. There's fewer of those. Okay, so that brings us to fire regimes. I know it sounds like somebody didn't get elected and took power or something, but no, it's a regime. Basically, a fire regime is the general pattern in which a fire occurs within a particular forest type, and it's made up of frequency and severity, how often it burns and how intensely it burns. And it's how we characterize this basic ecosystem function is fire regimes. The function gives rise to ecosystem structures, such as big fat trees on relatively dry sites, acorn-rich woodlands, etc. Fire really kind of dominates ecological processes in this type of forest. So, fire regime is the regime. And sometimes people call the frequency, called it the mean fire return interval, MFRI, and that's fine. It's all the same thing. And this is just a good example of a table which I was given by Alan Hart MacArthur. Thank you, Alan. You sent me that document. I was noodling through it, and I found this table, and I said, I've been looking for that. It's a slide I don't have yet. So I'll just bore you for a minute with this. The regime 1, 0 to 35 years, that's a very frequent fire regime. That's a place where there's a lot of lightning and a lot of days when the forest will burn, when we're below extinction moisture content. Yeah, there's a level of moisture in the forest where a forest won't burn. And if you have a lot of days when your moisture is below that level, you got a lot more fires. We can have fires in January around here if in a dry year. So 0 to 35, but because you keep removing those fuels every 5-10 years in this area, there's not much to burn, so your severity tends to be very low. The trees make it. All but a few saplings are able to survive it. The shrubs are knocked back, but not very much. They're able to resprout, etc. And as you can see, most of this planting, this is the planting area of South Cascades, 94% of it is considered fire regime 1. High frequency, low severity. On the other hand, 5 down there, I used to work on the Olympic Peninsula and used to backpack in Olympic National Park. Literally 140, 180 inches of rain a year. I mean, it was just incredible how wet that place was. But every 200 to 600 years, they would get dry east winds and everything would dry out, an unusually dry year, and then they get some dry lightning, again, unusual for that area, and boom, they'd have 50,000 acres of huge old growth burning up. So that's what they're talking about when they talk about fire regimes. It's really a fairly simple concept when you boil it down. Yes?
What's the difference between fire regime 1 and 2? So what's 35-year?
Oh, it's stand replacement, the severity. And usually most commonly, not always, that would be like chaparral, like buckbrush. Ceanothus cuneatus, wedge-leaf ceanothus, you know that stuff, you can light a Zippo underneath it and it'll burn. It's amazingly flammable. And that's what they're saying is like very poor rocky sites will be occupied by brush. And they will burn every 0 to 35 years. And because they're short stature, and so they're easy for a surface fire to get up in the crowns, little miniature crown fire is what a brush fire is. And because they have waxes, fats, and oils to protect them from the hot, dry conditions we have around here, they will be stand replacing. Yeah, but they don't care because they got all the seed and resprouting and all these methods.
More species specific.
Yeah, yeah, because there's really only 3 or 4 species that really do chaparral very well and very commonly around here. Whiteleaf manzanita, buckbrush, and a few others, yeah. And same with, well, anyway, yeah. And you could see, they don't think there's a whole lot of this yet. I would maybe argue with that, but I don't know enough to, it's not worth it, yeah. Anyway, but I do want to point that out. The wetter it gets, the more you tend toward long fire interval, but stand replacing, because there's so much fuel, it kills all the above ground vegetation. So, a little more about fire frequency. This is a tall forest that's typical of the mixed conifer. Throughout the monument, there's a lot of this stuff. And you can see the 0 to 3 inch surface fuels are almost gone in this stand. And you can also see it's recently had another underburn, a small one. But that's high frequency. This started out, this stand, having manzanita skeletons, Douglas fir saplings, poison oak shrubs, lots of poison oak shrubs, and dead branches and such, typical surface fuels. And because it's been repeatedly underburned, that stuff is pretty much gone. And so that's what we're talking about with the frequency. And another thing about frequent fire is it increases canopy base height. That arrow, and I'm sorry, that color didn't come through very well, but you can see what I'm talking about. A surface fire has got to really reach to get up into those branches, because they've been pruned repeatedly by fire or mechanically, and you tend to get a very, very high canopy base height. Tall, fat trees with limbs far off the ground, and that was all there was in many stands before European settlement. Oh, another thing about this, just from a fire crew foreman perspective, it's really nice when you can see a long ways. When you got a bunch of college kids that are depending on you to keep them safe while they're bent over cutting fire line, it's up to you to be able to see that spot fire before it traps you. So this canopy base height, this stuff about open forest is actually very important for the safety of the people that are trying to deal with the wildfire. Just point that out. Again, this is that Tub Spring sugar pine. You can tell I'm in love. This is the crown of it. And this frequent fires have a thinning effect. And this is a very powerful thing. A lot of people don't realize. Dry forests, you get these forests that have like 30, 35 inches of rain, but they got 6-foot diameter sugar pines and 4-foot diameter ponderosa pines. One of the reasons they're able to grow such big trees is because they're getting most of the water, most of the resources on that site, because everything else got killed by frequent fires. That's how this works. So this Tub Spring sugar pine, trees with space around them have plenty of water. Relatively open stands can vent the heat of a surface fire. That's really true. You can watch where there's gaps in the canopy and there's a surface fire running along. You can watch how it gets sucked up through those holes in the canopy, and it's able to vent. And it's less likely to kill the trees around that hole in the canopy, because the heat can escape. So, and yeah, they get these very broad crowns, lots of photosynthesis there. And frequent fires tend to leave the largest trees of the most fire-resistant species. So this is kind of a virtuous cycle. You kill a lot of the stuff that's fire-sensitive. You leave ponderosa pine in this case. It works out great. Thick bark, crowns high above surface fires, those kind of characteristics become most of the trees. And it's important to remember, and this, anybody who's ever grown carrots knows, if you don't thin that row of carrots, you're going to get 8 gazillion skinny, tiny little carrots at the end of the growing season. You thin them out, and then you get big, fat carrots. Well, that's right there. That's a 4-year degree in forestry right there. If diameter is a function of spacing, I just saved you 60 grand. Diameter is a function of spacing. Big, fat trees partly come from being well spaced. In summary, fire frequency has changed dramatically since the advent of fire suppression. Fire frequency tends to drive fire severity. And this is the Horse Creek fir, and one a great wildlife biologist. She was a fish and wildlife lady. But anyway, in Horse Creek, I don't know, maybe one of these fires got it, but I don't think so. That thing's got bark. I mean, it's got to be like this thick. It's an amazing tree. And it's, I don't know, 9 feet, something like 8 feet in diameter, something like that. Anyway, it's down on Highway 96. You're going down toward Happy Camp. It's Horse Creek. Yeah, it's easy to find. And this is the, unfortunately, the triple toast over east of Brookings. The Biscuit Fire, then the Klondike Fire, and then the Chetco Bar Fire have all burned the same area. And the fire severity is pretty extreme. Pretty extreme. And again, it's the percentage of the above ground vegetation that is killed by fire. And in this case, your severity is, I don't know, 90%, something like that. Again, though, this is triple toast. I'm sorry, firefighters call it toast when everything's killed. Low severity fire, on the other hand, barely scorches these 10-inch diameter pine and fir, but is top killing, and this is why I lit this one, that poison oak very nicely. And this is the 3rd time I've burned that stand, and there is like little rosettes here and there of poison oak. But the California fescue and serviceberry and other things have taken over. If you burn at the right time of year, you can really knock the heck out of poison oak. I'm off the subject. I apologize. Anyway, again, severity. So, pretty simple. Low, medium, and high. Low severity means less than 25% of the overstory trees are killed, and there's limited effects on soil because very little of the soil is actually exposed. There's still duff and litter. Moderate severity, 25 to 70%. 75% of the overstory are killed. And high severity, greater than 75, very often 100%. So, and sorry I keep showing this lightning, but it proves the point. It's a fire environment. You got ignitions happening every time a lightning storm comes through. And sometimes a lot of times it's wet lightning. And you say, well, that doesn't, no, actually that has a bunch of sleeper fires that 3 weeks later pop up and you got to go deal with them. So the monument has a lot of fire activity. And the Siskiyou, the South Cascades and the Siskiyous are both well known among firefighters for getting pounded by lightning on a pretty regular basis. You guys are close enough to that moisture coming up from the Gulf that it's already dried out a little bit, but it's still capable of building up and producing lightning. And just your luck, a lot of times this is where we get hit. And just to prove the point, kaboom. This is fire ignitions, 92 to 17. So it's 25 years of fire starts. The red is human caused. Sorry, I cut off part of the, and the blue is lightning, and the green is undetermined. Most of them they can determine. But you can see down near town or along I-5, there's tons of starts from humans, the red. But the blue, look at how it's scattered all over the place. And it's often in these remote canyons. And like I say, if it's wet, thunderstorm, it still starts the fire. It just hides for 2 or 3 weeks until everybody lets their guard down and then goes ripping. Anyway, plenty of lightning fires and plenty of human fire starts. So again, the monument has to, I think, has to deal with that, the ignition factor. Fires form a pattern. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so the color, the darker color just means it's more recent, like Klamathon and the other one, Oregon Gulch. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Those brain cells are dying fast, folks, at my age. Anyway, so this is all fires adjacent in and around the monument. You can see I-5 there in the lower left, and you can see that there's a heck of a lot of fires in that 120 years. A lot of fires. Pretty much everywhere, most places have burned once. And by the way, they know this is incomplete data. This is, guesswork. When you get back around 1900, you're looking at anecdotal reports and, oh, I saw smoke, that kind of thing. But lots of fire. Sorry, this pink is washed out, but this is 1900 to 1951, and I suspect the Weeks Act didn't get passed until 1911, so that's 10 years in. There still wasn't any suppression at the by federal, and no organized suppression. And then the CCC crews in the 1930s was when they actually started organized crews, get them in there and actually put a line around the fire and put it out. So you've really got 30, 40 years when there was no effective suppression, and it shows. I mean, show me a place that didn't burn. Look at all that stuff west of interstate. It burned at least once. And there's some big burns, Howard Prairie, up by Shell City and stuff. This was a lot of fires. And then 1951 to 2000, and by the way, we're almost done. Mercy. And you can see it was pretty quiet. 1951, you had aerial attack coming in. You had radios. People were actually able to talk to each other on fires. That was a big innovation. You had the bombers. You had the smoke jumpers. You had effective suppression. We had a period where this worked, okay? And it was pretty wet, too. Relatively wet. And so then by 2001 to 2018, you start getting some pretty big fires. And I would argue that this kind of shows us that full suppression, putting out every fire, doesn't work that great. Doesn't work that great. We're paying with some big fires. And, yeah.
What are the two big ones east of Cal National?
It's, there it is. Klamathon and Oregon Gulch, I believe, are those two big ones at the bottom of the slide. Was that what you were asking? Sorry.
The ones east, flip back to the...
Yeah. This is so great. This thing's working so good. Zainab. Yeah. The brains. This one?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the question?
One's directly east of Ashland and one's east of Cowan. Middle of the... Higher up.
Oh, I don't, I'm sorry. I don't, but here's the good news. You can go to this site and click on any of those polygons, including those ones really old, 1900 and 1950, and it will tell you something about that fire. That's where I got those other slides.
Due east of Ashland, that's the Dead Indian Memorial.
I'm sorry?
That was the Dead Indian Memorial Valley.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know the individual fires, but you can find out pretty easily.
What is the site, please?
One was up by Grizzly, the other one's on the backside there, by Climax area. Came up from the other side.
Do you know the name of it?
I don't remember the name.
One was called the Grizzly Fire
Yeah,
over there.
but there was another one that came out
Okay.
of Climax and Antelope Creek on the other side.
Okay, yeah, thank you, and thank you. Yeah,
What's the site name, do you know? You are-
I'm sorry, you'll have to get with me after because I'll have to get out of the slide presentation to get the, you understand. I don't have the technical skill to do those two things. That's walking and chewing gum. Just beyond, yeah. Anyway, so just to give you an idea, let's see, did I go too far? No, I didn't. Okay, so I see a trend there that it's getting harder to put them out. I think that's partly the 2 degrees warmer. And I think it's partly the ingrowth. There's so much vegetation is coming in underneath. So I think there's a trend there, but I can't prove it, so there you go. Okay, yeah, Klamathon, 38,000 acres. Fortunately, about a third of it was high severity, everything dead. A third was moderate, you remember 25% to 75% from that other slide. And a third of it was low severity. So it was probably kind of within the range of natural variation, we hope. Unfortunately, Oregon Gulch, yes, sir.
It's an interesting fire too, because it was relatively early in the season. It was like, I believe it was July 4th.
Right, and so your live fuel moisture and your 1,000-hour fuels were probably pretty mellow. You good, very excellent, thank you, thank you. I love it when people do that, thank you. Oregon Gulch, unfortunately, I am informed that 27,000 acres, it was a lot of high severity. A lot of it, everything was killed. I've been told that they're having a little bit of trouble getting replants to take. Of course, nowadays we don't really have the money to replant a lot of the acres that get burned, so that's another story. But apparently there was quite a lot of, I don't have exact numbers, of high severity in Oregon Gulch. So, and it's 7:20, okay, all right. Let's go here. Yep, we're getting close. This was one hell of a pilot. We were like actually applauding. We knew they couldn't hear us, but we thought, yeah, that's a pilot and a half. And that's the old P4. That's the one the wings would fall off periodically. Anyway, so this is just me and my wish list. It's just a few slides and then we're done. And then we can Q&A our brains out if you want. And I can start looking up that website. There you are. Okay. So this is just me, a wish list. It is not the opinion of the Friends of the Monument or of the Bureau of Land Management or any other entity, okay? It's just little old me. I am hoping that the monument is going to be able to do a lot more planned fire. Whether they wait for lightning to do it and then monitor it, whatever, or if they go out with the drip torches and do all the planning and the EIS and all of that, I don't care. I just would really like to see a lot more low severity fire. Personally, and I know this is controversial, so just don't throw stuff. I am okay with mechanical treatment. Certainly not in the Soda Mountain Wilderness. You don't want to mess with wilderness boundaries. You don't want to mess with the aesthetics when you're near the PCT. There's a lot of constraints you'd have to put on this. But I have seen what you can do to a stand that's being, unnatural things are happening to it. Sorry to use the word natural, but I don't know how else quite to describe it. But this isn't just an example where some very large oaks are being encroached by Douglas fir, which is slowly going to choke them out, or the next fire is going to take out this fir and the oak, obviously. And it's being mechanically thinned, and then they're burning, underburning after they've thinned and pile burned. And the last shot, it looks good. I think it looks good. As somebody who fought fire for a long time, I could cut a lot of line through something like that, no prob. And I wouldn't be worried about killing some college kids, you know. Whereas that one, I can't see 10 feet. I've got torching. I've got all kinds of problems with that first one. So I like this, but I know I'm prejudiced. So I'm just saying it's a possibility, mechanical fuel treatment. in certain places. Near roads would be my suggestion. I would love to see effective management of noxious weeds. You have some of the most beautiful meadows I've ever seen. All my travels in the West, the monument has magnificent meadows. And they've got all kinds of tritilia and all kinds of wonderful wildflowers and so forth. So I would like to see that. I would love to see a lot more fire research. The accidental example of the Beaver Creek Pinery, where we've had those 5 fires that we missed in other areas, shows me that we really ought to try to figure this stuff out. We really ought to have some PhDs working on it night and day. And that takes money too. And, oh yes, I would love to see if there could be community support for MIST. That's minimum impact suppression techniques. If you had a lightning fire that set a madrone on fire like this, it had rot in the middle, and it's burning like this, there are people, fire managers, who would have a bulldozer come out and cut a line around that, knock over a bunch of trees and stuff, and make an 8-foot wide bulldozer line around it. The logical thing to do is make a little scratch line about tree length around it, and just have somebody watch it during the dry part of the day, the windy part of the day, until the darn thing falls over, and then you go in with a bladder bag and you mop it up, and you're done. You don't have to do these overkill, hardcore, dropping a bunch of chemicals, revving up the diesel machines. That, a lot of times, that's the right thing to do. But I'm saying a lot of times it's not. I've been on 4 or 5 wilderness fires where we were asked if we wanted to do this. That's how shy they were about it. This is when I was with the Hotshot program. And we all said, yeah. Well, most of us, because we figured there'd be more overtime. But still, it works great. And you don't, when you're done, we had a guy at a pump station, which is normally a muddy mess, a pump right next to the creek, Mark III pump, vibrates like crazy. He carefully, this wonderful jewel-like set of plants, flowers and monkey flowers and moss and stuff by this creek, he carefully cuts that, rolls it up just like a turf, you know, like a lawn, how they do, sets it aside, keeps it wet for 2 shifts while he's running this pump, and then after he takes the pump out, rolls it back out. You could not tell that they had normally a very messy, muddy mess pump station there. And everybody who was doing the fire line and everything, they took all these extra precautions. It was fun, it was easy. Firefighters like MIST. And it leaves a place like the monument unscrewed up, even though you have to put the fire out. So MIST, I think, would be wonderful if there was support for it, a place like the monument. And all of that is just by, what do you call it? Fritillaria, recurva. It likes fire, by the way. There's a lot of these tritilia. There's a lot of beautiful wildflowers that love a good fire. And California fescue, one of our most common bunchgrass, big bunchgrass, the flowers get like this tall. It loves a good fire. And 2 weeks later, it's greening up. You burn the thatch off, boom, it's back 2 weeks later. So, anyway, that's it. Questions? Yes?
I've got a ton of questions, but I'll just work backwards. Why isn't there support for MIST? You said you need support, so why isn't there support?
The agencies are a little afraid of it because if the fire gets away, you're using MIST on it, and it gets away and burns a subdivision. Well, of course, it would have burned the subdivision anyway. I mean, you know, as crazy winds and everything, a bulldozer would not have helped. But they can say, oh, we did everything we could, rather than, oh, we were using this weird technique, hippie bullshit technique, that kind of argument. So that's why I think it hasn't really been as successful.
Liability.
Yeah, and And in wilderness fires, really remote fires, a lot of the what they call Category 1 crews, which is smoke jumpers, rappellers, and hotshot crews, they're really good at doing like 50 push-ups. Yeah, I've won that contest. It was 40 years ago, but seriously. And so they have some attitudes that aren't compatible with the idea of like working with the ecosystem. And we need to do some retraining around that too. Yes, sir, go ahead.
I saw the year-end for fire season ODF report
Uh-huh.
for the region, I believe. It certainly was not the monument only. 8 o'clock the next day.
Yeah.
It's the same theory.
10 a.m. policy, you bet.
But there's no subtlety there to the shoulder season, early in the fire season, very late in the fire season, let them burn.
I know. That kind of nuance we're not there yet.
Is that the same cover your ass?
I-
Make sure you know.
I did not say cover your ass.
No, I
It was a civilian who said that.
Is that?
No, seriously, you're absolutely right. It's cover your ass, yeah. A lot of it is. But also, think about it. You got this responsibility. You got to get that fire. You're the guy the person who deals with this fire. And if it burns a subdivision or an owl nest or any number of other things, it's on you. So your default is going to be get the dozer off the lowboy and put it to work. And
The
that's
wind comes up and it goes from 6 acres to 600 acres.
right. And that's your fault.
Yeah, it's not easy, but early in the year, late in the year,
I know. And people say, oh, well, it got away and burned 20 acres. I say, yeah, but it was April. The live fuel moisture was 200%. It didn't, everything that it burned is going to sprout a week from now. And the trees didn't even know there was a fire, the ones with some bark on them, So you're absolutely right. No argument. And the scientists would agree with you, with a few exceptions. Yeah. Yes.
Can I just add something to that?
Sure.
I just, personally work on a lot of fire issues around the region. My name's Luke, and I work for kind of forest fires, different groups around the region. And I think that what Rich is saying about community support for MIST is really important because there's a lot of fear around fire these days. And increasingly more and more and more our federal land managers are becoming very, very heavy-handed, largely because of public pressure and political pressure. And so a lot of people don't like to do it, and you hear the federal land managers complain about folks Monday morning quarterbacking or whatever. But I think it's really important for people to actually engage during fire events and advocate for things like MIST. Like when the monument burned in the Klamathon fire, they voltaged 32 miles across the monument, and the vast majority of that actually never was used for fire line. And so there's a lot of damage being done, and we're seeing this huge uptick in wilderness suppression impacts and wilderness dozer lines, and there may be times when those things are necessary or useful. There's a lot of times that it's political games. Right now, you got Court Boyce on the coast ordering wilderness dozer lines, and the Forest Service responding and doing it when it served virtually no purpose. And so you're seeing that increasingly, a lot of like contingency lines. They're building these lines like miles and miles from the fire in really wild areas and doing a lot of damage. And I just think that it's incumbent on people like us that care about these places to speak up a little bit and say, hey, we understand fire is a threat, we understand there's risk here, but we also understand we've got this beautiful legacy that we want to maintain.
And
one of the ways we can do that is by managing fire, and one of the ways we can do that is by minimizing our impact when we suppress fires.
And let me emphasize what he's saying on the fort complex, which was over, it started around Happy Camp, but what's the name of that little town? Syad, yeah, Syad Valley, started there, was burning real hot, was threatening the dozen trailers that comprise Syad. It's not a big town. And there was a lot of support for going in real hot and heavy. The supervisor of the Klamath Forest was very pro-suppression, and so were the locals. When it came over the hill and came down, what's the name of that trail? it'll come to me in a minute, but some really wonderful places. A bunch of us went to the public meeting and said, leave the dozer on the lowboy. We really want you to take it easy. This fire's on the ground, it's not crowning, it's burning, it's making forward progress, but it's not killing a lot of trees. It's leaving a lot of stuff. So keep, and they gently brought it down to that trail. Oh, what's the name of it? No. This is coming out of the Red Buttes. Oh, come on, it's the most popular. What's that? Yell. No, my hearing aids, yeah.
Just Buford, probably?
No, anyway, the point is they gently burned down to a trail where they could stop it. And they did a beautiful job, and it's a nice underburn, and then there's some hot patches, and it's exactly what that place would have burned like 1,000 years ago. And so it was just a great job. They were responding to the people in that public meeting, and I believe you were there. It was so long ago your beard was not white. So that's how long you were there, and I was there. A bunch of us made comments similar to what we're just saying tonight. And I believe they responded. Well, they knew this side was more a bunch of hippies, the Applegate, how they are. Yeah. So they took cognizance of that. So I do think Luke's right. Public pressure is really good. The Forest Service, they know that you guys pay their salary. They know you own that national forest. It really is not Forest Service land. It really is our land. I know, that's kind of sappy, sorry. But it is.